Hello, hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk HP Lovecraft. If you've not yet subscribed to our channel, please take a moment to do that now. All right, so we are moving on. Yes, we are on story number 4 of 8 in this third phase of Let's Talk HP Lovecraft. Phase 1 was all the main stories written exclusively by Lovecraft. Phase 2 was a lot of his collaborations and revisions that are widely said to have had a big impact from Lovecraft himself. This phase features 8 stories that more or less fall into this category of stories where it's not entirely known how much of an impact Lovecraft had on these stories, but he does have a connection to them, so I thought it was worth talking about them here. Today's story is Ashes, written by Lovecraft and C. Eddy Jr. It was first published in the March 1924 edition of Weird Tales. The way that these reviews work is I do a brief synopsis of what happens in the story, all the plot and action and character, and then I sort of wrap up with some thoughts and things about what it all means for you and whether it's worth your time to read at all. All right, so Ashes. Looking very pale, a man named Malcolm Bruce shows up at the home of his friend, who is oddly named Prague. But Prague sets him down, gives him a cigar, and then Bruce proceeds to tell him the story of the harrowing events that have just occurred in his life. After losing his job, he becomes the new lab assistant to a chemist known as Professor Arthur Van Allister. On the job, he falls in love with Allister's secretary, Miss Marjorie Purdy. Meanwhile, Van Allister has locked him away to work on some revolutionary new chemical compound that he says will change the world. One day, he finally comes out of his lab. He orders Bruce to get him a rabbit. They put the rabbit into a glass container, and then from a glass vial, he pours a clear liquid into the glass container with the rabbit. And then poof, suddenly the rabbit becomes nothing but a little pile of white ash. Van Allen says that his compound will revolutionize the world. It will make armies invincible. They'll be able to protect themselves with glass, which is not affected by the compound, but they could use it and they can utterly destroy and turn to ash anything that dares to stand in their way. Driven on by the shock of the moment of the experiment, Bruce and Marjorie get together. They become lovers, and very soon they vow to marry one another. Not long after that, Marjorie goes missing from his house. Bruce goes around looking for her everywhere. He even goes to the lab. But there in the lab, he sees her coat and hat leaning over a chair, and he sees what looks like a glass coffin full of ash, and he immediately assumes that she has been murdered by the doctor, who we now know to be a mad scientist. Van Allister and Bruce get in a fight. Ultimately, Bruce wins, and to cover up his doings, he lowers Allister's body into the glass coffin. He then goes and tells this entire story to Prague, which brings us back to the present, to the narration. At that point, Prague noticed that, you never actually saw her. Are you sure she didn't just run away or something? And after a little bit of looking, they go to the lab and they find out that she's been locked away in a back room. She tells her story, which is that the doctor had planned to kill Bruce and then intended for her to watch and to be the witness to the immense power of his new creation. So in fact, she's not dead, but the doctor is. So our poor Bruce is in fact a murderer. All right, so negatives, it's formulaic, it's predictable, it's attempting a twist ending, but it's not fully earned, and for all those reasons, it doesn't go over as well as it probably should. Van Allister is barely established as being a mad scientist figure. Bruce's assumption of Marjorie's death comes very, very quickly without a whole lot of searching. And this is all on a compressed timeline, just over a few days. And then Prague very quickly jumps from hearing the story to assuming that she's, still out there and they should go looking for her. And oh, lo and behold, she's in the same building where the death happened, just on the other side of a door. So for all those reasons, not very effective and it probably could have been a lot more effective. But the positives are that, it's pretty short, but it's also fairly well written except for those obvious structural problems. It sort of has a light, airy, quickly paced, moving, effervescent type of prose, which I quite liked. It didn't feel like a chore to read. The last story that I read, Both On, was a bit of a... how do I put it? A bit of a bore. It just... a little bit painful to read. It just wasn't flowing very well. But this flows a whole lot better despite, again, those structural issues. I thought it was a noble attempt at the twist ending genre. Ultimately, those types of stories are very difficult to set up. And then, of course, the more you read, especially if you've read a lot of Lovecraft, you see these things coming. And they certainly didn't... do enough to disguise what was really happening for me. Maybe a reader who's a little bit less acquainted with the genre might fall for it once or twice. But ultimately not the worst story in the batch. There have been a few stinkers, but again, we are moving very, very quickly through this phase. We've read so far Ashes, Both On, 4 O'Clock, and The Sorcery of Alfar. Next up, we will be looking at 4 more stories: The Ghost Eater, The Love Dead, Deaf, Dumb, and Blind, and finally Satan's Servants in a few weeks' time. So thank you for tuning in. Do you want to read it? Should you read it? Yeah, give it a chance. It's like a 20-minute read. Not a big loss. A little bit of fun. Ultimately not something that's going to stick with you for very long, but perhaps maybe worth that small abbreviated reading amount of time, which you'll need to allot for it. But thank you, and until next time, keep it